Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast, the podcast designed to challenge you to break the mold that average has on the world. Each episode offers insights directly from those who choose to break average every day. Now for the latest insights, here are your hosts, Paul Gustafson and Barry Smith.
Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast. And again, Barry, we get to dive into this topic. I can't wait. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. And here we go. One more time. Always good topics, always good conversation. And I'm glad to be here with you, my friend.
I appreciate it. You know, we started off talking about imagination and we're gonna tie a bow on that in a couple of weeks in terms of how this all ties together. There are 12 powerful ways to really invent the future. And we've been talking about those over the last few weeks. And today we're going to talk about the power of resilience. So I love that topic. And we were going to bring in a special guest. Can I bring somebody? Can I transport them in? Right? Remember the old Star Trek? Bring them in a transporter. So I'm going to do my very best to bring in. I'm going to transport. There he is right there. Mr. Dave Cornell is joining us from Minnesota. Hey, Dave, how are you?
I am doing well, and it is an honor to be with you guys today. And to talk about resilience is a special thing. It's something that we all have sometimes, and I look forward to having a conversation with you guys about it.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with that. First of all, Minnesota, is it cold yet?
You know, we have been cold. I think we were down to 15 above last week, but now it's gotten mild again. So our highs are in the mid 50s, and we're usually below freezing at night. So nothing too bad yet.
Because, I mean, you have to be resilient to live in Minnesota, right?
I would say yes, we do. Yes, we do. Because our thermometer is certainly resilient. It goes way down and comes way up. So, yeah, we live in the land of resiliency.
Barry, how cold does it get in Florida?
Oh my gosh, dude. The other day it was down to like 73, and I thought, the world was going to end. People got coats on and they're afraid to go outside, trying to figure out why their heat won't work in the car. It's crazy. It's a different place down here. Seriously.
I'm laughing because one time, I go to Florida a lot. So I land in Orlando. I used to do my little routine was, okay, I'm going to be here for 6 days. I'm going to Walmart. I'm going to load up. I go to Walmart. It's probably 40 degrees outside, 45.
Not good.
Maybe low 50s even. It wasn't too bad, but compared to where I was in Virginia, which was like 22 degrees. But as I walk into the store, and I'm just wearing pretty much like what I'm wearing now, right? Just a button shirt. People are walking in with knitted hats on, boom, winter jackets, like they're ready for skiing. They're like looking for goggles. Come on, people. This is Florida.
Oh, dude, when it gets down to 40, lizards fall out of trees. I mean, it's a crazy place. You think I'm kidding? Google it.
No, I've seen the videos. I'm telling you.
Yeah. So what
I'll say this. Those lizards aren't very resilient. They don't bounce.
Not at all. Not at all. They will warm back up, but they don't bounce. They kind of hit with a thud.
But Barry, I mean, you spent some time in Oregon, so you kind of know the cold weather world too. So, and you and me and Dave and so many others, you spent the whole week out in Colorado earlier this year with a sweatshirt and shorts on after an 18-inch dump of snow.
Yeah.
How'd you do that?
Dude, I don't like pants. What do you want me to tell you?
Resilience, baby. Resilience. All right.
I like my freedom, man. It's all good. Just throw a hoodie on and good to go.
Good to go.
All you need.
So let's talk about this resilience and sometimes we substitute the word courage. Are they the same? But let's start off with resilience. What is resilience and why is it important? So, Barry, I want to start with you first, and then we'll bring in our subject matter expert on this and let him share. And Dave, be ready to share why this is so important to you. But anyway, go ahead, Barry, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love this. So I kind of see them as two different things. And as far as resilience goes, when I hear that word, I think of bouncing back, like you've fallen, you got knocked down, you got to get back up. You're resilient, right? You're going to dig a little deeper, find a way to keep going. you know, how many times have we watch a movie or read a book and you hear about people, it's, you know, it's not getting knocked down, it's getting back up, right? And what are you going to do with that? And then how do you wrap, you know, when it's a hard fall, how do you pull from within to get that resiliency, to really keep going? You know, we've got to be a little elastic. We all got to have a little bit of Gumby in us, right? You know, be able to bend around corners and be flexible, but it's really being resilient. And you know, I try and be that. I don't know if I'm mastered that yet,
Yeah.
but it's a tough one. You know, usually we need to be resilient when things aren't going so good. So it's a challenging mix for sure.
Well, it's funny is because before we turn on the record, I mentioned to you guys, like, it never goes according to the script, right? You have a mindset in terms of what the day is going to do, and you can still have those objectives, but in terms of how you accomplish those objectives, something always comes up. There are surprises that happen and comes down to resilience. So Dave, you heard Barry's thoughts on that. Dive into this, man. Tell us a little bit more your thoughts on resilience.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Barry on that resilience is the ability to bounce back. When I hear the word resilience, I have two images that pop up in my mind. First, it's a ball of Play-Doh. And when you throw that ball of Play-Doh down on the ground, it doesn't come back. But if you've got a rubber ball, a baseball, a softball, a basketball, or whatever, you bounce it down and it comes back up. So it's, as Barry said, it's the ability to come back up, to bounce back. And I agree with him that they're not the same, but I also think that it requires courage to be resilient. You have to have the courage to get back up. So often it's easy to just, I'm tired of this. I've been fighting this battle too long. And I'm not getting out of bed today. I'm not, whatever it might happen to be. And we don't get up. And I think it takes courage to recognize how important it is to get back up.
That's so good.
Great point.
So let's talk about courage for a second. We'll come back to the resilience because I think it does match. I like how you just shared it. Dave, you yourself, there was a point, and maybe this is a great opportunity for you to share a little bit of that story. There's a point in your life where you realize the importance of courage. Can you just share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, back in 2010, I lost my job, and it was at the time in 2010 when I lost my job, I didn't think it was, I lost my job. I'm a capable guy. I'll find new work in a month or two, but that was right in the middle of that recession, depression, however you want to phrase it, from 2008 to 2012, 13. And I found out very quickly that I wasn't going to find a job. And there were many times when I didn't get out of bed. And I was seeing a wonderful Christian counselor who diagnosed me with situational depression because I was out of work. We were running out of money over the course of about 18 months. We went through all of our savings. My wife then lost her job 13 months after I did. And so we ended up losing our home. And so in June of 2011, we had no home, we had no jobs, and we had basically no money. And so it was then with the help of this counselor that I began to recognize the role that fear had played in my life for much of my life, going back to when I was a young boy, and the patterns of avoidance that I had developed in things that were challenging. And so with the help of the counselor and recognizing fear in my life, then it's the need to recognize that you have to have courage to be resilient and to get back up and do the things that you need to do. So it's first acknowledging the fear and then beginning to take steps to be courageous. Courage isn't about not having fear. Courage is about being fearful, but stepping into that fear. My favorite John Wayne quote is, "Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." And so it's recognizing the role that fear is playing in your life so you can begin to do courageous things and be resilient.
Well, I love that. But a lot of times we feel like I can't have courage unless I get rid of the fear. And you're sharing something a little bit different. You're saying, no, the fear's there. Courage is a choice. That's essentially what you're saying, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. you can have fear without courage, but you can't have courage without fear. That we have to be able to recognize the fear and step into it, as opposed to doing what I did with many things for many years. Fear caused me to avoid doing things and not doing courageous things. And so that's exactly right, Paul. Oftentimes you'll hear people talk about living fearlessly. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we can live fearlessly. If you Google that, you'll find 51 million or 53 million hits that you can look up on that. And yeah. I challenge people, which would you rather do? Live fearlessly or live courageously? Because I don't think that we can live fearlessly. We all have fear. We just don't acknowledge it with each other.
So when people say that, live fearlessly, I've said it myself, I'm sure. What we're really saying is live courageously. That's what
I would say wholeheartedly, that's exactly what they're saying. Because if you really stop to process through it, we all face fears. And if we say that we are fearless, I would say that you're lying and you're not acknowledging the fear that you have in your life.
Yeah. I think I'm preaching to the choir in this one. If you don't name your fears, then they're going to get you every single time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Barry, your thoughts on this, right? So he's talking about the fear that we're facing. And I want to go back to your story a little bit, Dave, in a minute. But what kind of runs through your mind right now, Barry?
Well, I'll tell you what runs through my mind every time I hear the word courage. And you may remember this. It was one of the early Maxwell Live events. And one of the bonuses that we had as part of the mentorship program was to do a minute with Maxwell with John. And so it just so happens that my word was courage. And so, I get to Barry, what's your word? John, my word's courage. And he looks at me, in that Maxwell grin, he says, "You've seen the movie Braveheart, William Wallace." And I'm like, oh yeah. And that, I think about that. I think about The Patriot, the movie The Patriot.
Yeah. Just
the historical courage. There's so much in the world we live in now that's fake and made up and made for TV. And, it's so inauthentic. It just makes me crazy. But I just love the historical dramas that we've got access to see what real courage was all about. I mean, this isn't just, going out for a fight or getting ready to go to some type of battle. I mean, these guys were laying their lives on the line.
Yeah.
And you can't tell me, to your point, Dave, you can't tell me those guys weren't scared to death. Yeah. I mean, you talk about fear. I mean, it's almost a death sentence walking out on that battlefield. Yeah. And yet, man, they did it. They did it. Courage, great leadership lessons in both those movies. But to me, that's courage. When I think about courage, it's that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, you got to go back in time to, in my opinion, see some of the authentic things that we talk about, when we're talking about personal development and leadership and communication. It's a phony world we live in. And so, to have those great examples, the old days, my favorite president, Teddy Roosevelt, the Rough Riders. I mean, just so much there to see and learn from. And I think we've forgotten that. Now it's kind of about how do you manipulate the system? How do you maybe not name your fear, but still act courageous? I mean, it's just a different world now. So I think if we can bring some authenticity into, being resilient, being courageous, I think it just positions us that much better to be a better version of ourselves and make a greater impact on those around us.
Amen. So Dave, what were some of those fears that you faced early on in 2010?
Yeah. Do you mind if I just comment a little bit on what Barry shared?
Take it. Yeah, man.
And Barry, I agree wholeheartedly with those examples that you've given of those movies. But I think sometimes what happens when we look at those movies and we go, man, what amazing courage those people had in doing those amazing, big, dramatic things. We're like, I could never do that. But yet I believe that we are called to be courageous sometimes every day. And I'll give you an example of that, a conversation that I had with a lady in church on Sunday. She was sharing with me a story of her sister-in-law who was going to finally stand up to her 44-year-old son and tell him that she was no longer going to make his house payment. This lady has been afraid to hold her son accountable till now. He's at the age of 44, and he has an expectation that his mom is always going to take care of him. It takes great courage to stand up to those people in our lives that are taking advantage of us. Maybe it's somebody in your family, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a neighbor, anything like. But we have those opportunities to be courageous every day, and those are scary things that we encounter in our everyday lives. It's not about going to war. Again, don't disagree with you on those things, Barry, but it's about doing those things every day where we have this feeling in our heart and in our gut that, oh man, I just don't want to have this conversation, or I don't want to do that. And yet that's what courage is. It's stepping into that.
Yeah, I love that. Couldn't agree more. And I think that's, I think that kind of plays into the authenticity that I feel like we miss now, because what are most people? Most people are afraid of what other people think of them. And so they're not willing to step up and be courageous. So I love that story. I mean, that's an example of what people should strive for. Simple story, right? Nothing huge about that, but for her, a big deal. For him, in my opinion, a total lack of awareness. But time to get courageous and, do the right thing. I love what, Paul Martinelli taught us. We don't always do things right, but we always try and do the right thing. And I think courage plays into that as well.
Yeah. Yep.
I love it. So let me pull on some of those fears, and Barry, and maybe all of us can kind of share. What are the fears that you faced, Dave, 2010, maybe still today, and in a different setting now? Because I know you live with courage, but it doesn't mean that you live without fear. We just talked about that. But what are some of those fears that we face? What are the ones that you faced in 2010? And what are some of the fears that people are facing today with COVID and everything else? 2010.
Yeah. So starting in 2010, again, I thought I was going to find a job in a couple of months. I didn't. So it went on for an extended period of time. And I found myself staying home, sometimes staying in bed and not going out. Particularly, I remember not going to church often. What I was afraid of was that people were going to come and say to me, Dave, how's the job search going? And I didn't have anything I was afraid to interact with people. I was afraid to have to tell them that nothing's happening with the job search. I was afraid of continuing to let my family down, because that's what I felt like I was doing, was letting my family down, wasn't living up to my obligation as a husband and a father. And even though my daughters were grown and out of the house at that point, but I was afraid of not fulfilling the obligations that I had in my life. I'm afraid of letting people down, afraid of not upholding my family name, fears like that. So those are, I'll stop and let you ask additional questions on that. But those are, back in 2010, those are some of the things that I faced.
Now you had a therapist, you're able to share a little bit of that with her, but how difficult was that, just to admit some of those fears?
I felt really safe with her, and it did take, she was very good at asking good questions, which I think is the role of a good counselor or a good therapist. And so she did a really nice job of, I'll say, forcing me to engage with her. But, she said, I want you to journal every day. Even if you don't have anything to say, you just start by journaling. And maybe your first sentence is, I don't have anything to say. I don't know what I'm going to say. Maybe that's what your whole page is going to say. But for half an hour, I want you to write. And in that process, it's amazing how the mind starts to engage and you start to write these things down. And so I began to recognize my father died very suddenly when I was 14. And there was a lot of fear around that based on some things that I was told by someone, in fact, the person that came to get me out of school to tell me that my dad had died. And within that, it developed patterns of avoidance. I was told by this person not to cry and not to ask any questions because it would be really hard on my mom. So in essence, I was told to avoid grieving. And so that's what I did. And very often when we start patterns of avoidance in one area, they leak over into other areas of my life. And I began to avoid things in relationships, avoid things in school, avoid things in jobs. And I didn't recognize that till I was 55 years old and lost my job, and then had this counselor that helped me to see those patterns of avoidance, because I was afraid to deal with things that were hard.
Wow, that's powerful. I wrote a bunch of stuff down. Patterns of avoidance. I want to get to that in a minute. But I also wrote down the Psalms. right? Now, we're not getting religious on anybody, but I just want to express something here that I think is really powerful. When Dave talked about journaling, I immediately went to the idea of what King David did back in the Old Testament. Think of it as a journal, right? Now there was a few other psalmists, people that wrote stuff, but if you look at the ones that David wrote, they all kind of start off with him naming his fear, naming this apprehension, the struggle that he might be dealing with. I mean, here's the king of Israel laying out some of his struggles and challenges. He wasn't even king in some of those Psalms, right? He was anointed to be one, but he wasn't yet. And then, of course, he was later. And, he was human. He made some mistakes. There's no doubt about it. But what's really cool is you read some of those Psalms. If you read it just from the standpoint of him labeling and identifying those apprehensions, those fears, those doubts that he had, there's a transition that takes place. And it's a transition into courage, into resilience, into trusting, in this case, trusting God Almighty to help him through it, but really giving himself credit that he's going to be able to be okay. He's going to be all right. He's going to live through it, and that's what kind of hit me as you were sharing about the journaling part. Would you say that maps pretty well with your experience?
Oh, without question. And I think, Paul, you used a couple of words in what you were sharing there: anxiety and apprehension. I often encounter people who will say, "Oh, I don't have any fears. I have anxiety about things or apprehension about." Okay, call it what you want. At the core, that's fear. And a lot of people try to even avoid using that word, and because they want to believe that they are above that, when the reality is that we're not. But yeah, I think the Psalms are a great example of acknowledging what our fear is, and then beginning to figure out how do we step into that. So.
And another example too, for you literary fans out there, Diary of Anne Frank. Right? Think about, she's sharing. It's a powerful read. If you read it from the context, everybody looks for the special quotes out of it. Okay, maybe there's a couple, but don't look at it for just the quotes. It's not a quote book. It's a storybook. It's a storybook of resilience, of somebody who's in hiding, her whole family, and I won't give it away. If you're not familiar with it, go check it out. The Hiding Place, the Diary of Anne Frank, all that. That's the Corrie ten Boom story as well. There are multiple stories. I love those real stories, Barry, right? I mean, we talked about some of the true stories, but they're watered down. The true story is, guys, there is some struggles, there's some challenges that we face, and it's recognizing that, being aware of those challenges, and still stepping forward.
Yeah, you mentioned those books, and I, in preparation for our call, I pulled out from my bookshelf Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, another book that is just powerful. A guy who was in a Nazi prison camp, I think it was Auschwitz, and survived, and just talks about, Paul, a favorite topic of yours, about hope, and that was what his resilience power was his hope that he had.
So Barry, lots here, man. I capture a bunch of thoughts here, but what's coming through your mind there?
I love the anxiety and apprehension piece, that you guys brought up. And to me, fear comes before that. Anybody who's going to tell you they got some anxiety and apprehension, but doesn't have any fear, well, yeah, okay. It's coming from fear. Yeah. My journey probably wasn't as drastic as yours, Dave. I didn't lose my job, but went through a similar situation. I was blessed to be able to leave my job, but that fear was still there. The same type of things of being a provider, providing stability, being uncomfortable in a space. A lot of you know my story. 30 years in construction, going into coaching, speaking, and training. I mean, that's pretty much a 180 turn. 12 years ago, public speaking for me was screaming across a job site. It was a different time and a different place. And so there was a lot of that fear, that anxiety. And the idea of, I think that the takeaway so far for me is this patterns of avoidance, right? And so I just this last week shared this with my coach and also another mastermind group I'm involved in. And I said, I'm afraid to go back to where I was a year ago. As far as, we started out several episodes, Paul, we talked about habits and patterns, right? You talk about patterns of avoidance right now. And for me, the patterns and the habits that I had a year ago about creating an environment conducive to growth, doing things in a timely manner, sticking with something, these are all things that I've been working on very hard for the last year to really turn myself into a more productive person, be able to stay more on point. Last week I talked about commitment being one of my values and how, I'm not so good at commitment sometimes. And that's why it is one of my values, because it's something I want to work on to be better. And so when I look at all those changes I've made over the last year for the better, right, and still got plenty of room to go here, but I'm afraid to go back in there. So now I'm very cautious when I see a slip or I see part of that old environment creep up, or I look at my desk and I go, that stack of papers getting a little tall. It's much more of my awareness now to go, hey, don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid to drop. Just be intentional, take action, and do what you know is the right thing to do. Fear drives us, right? If we weren't afraid of anything, what would drive us? It's as much as where we don't want to go, where we don't want to end up, is where we do. And so to be able to avoid some of those things out of fear, it's a good thing, I think.
Yeah. Barry, you said something interesting there, and so this is just my mind, because I live in a world of recognition of fear and courage all the time. You talked about that stack that's on your desk. Don't be afraid of that, and it's just part of our language. Don't be afraid of it. I'll just say it's okay to be afraid of it, but dig into it anyway. It's okay to be afraid. If we go, okay, don't be afraid. Well, I am afraid, so therefore I'm not going to do it. And so it's okay to be afraid. Dig into it anyway.
Yeah, it drives us.
Yeah.
Drives us.
Yeah, this is such a fascinating conversation. So let's think about this, right? What if the fear, to your point, as you're sharing this is the question that I have. What if the fear, the anxiety, the apprehension, the doubt, what if it's a prompt to persevere? Like, how do we shape our mindset? And this is kind of getting to the how. How do we be resilient? We're talking about three things: courage, resilience, fear, all that. But ultimately, this is the power of resilience. And we realize that resilience is, we have to be resilient through a challenge. And we've all undergone and gone through challenges. Every one of us. I don't know anybody who hasn't gone through a challenge. Even Jesus went through a challenge, right? So the power of resilience is so critical. But the question that I'm wondering is, what if these are all prompts for courage, right? And I don't know if that, and it's kind of this mindset, and maybe it's different thinking, but maybe that's what we need, is different thinking.
I would use a different word. I would use the word trigger.
Yeah.
It's a word I'm fond of, because I think there's triggers in all our lives. Sometimes it's a trigger for a wrong way to go. Sometimes it's a trigger for a right way to go. But I love, prompt or trigger. Yeah. I love the idea of those things setting us on a new course, a different direction. But I think it comes, Paul, to that point. And I think I know you guys, and I'm sure, most of those listening realize that that's an awareness thing. To feel the prompt, to identify the trigger, you got to be at a level of awareness to be able to do that. And I think that plays into a lot of what you've shared, Dave, in that we've got to be, can't have courage without fear. So that awareness, versus the guy who says, well, I don't really have any fear. I just have, I'm just anxious and apprehensive. Well, okay. You run with that, pal. We'll see how that works out. But I think if we have that level of awareness to know that fear is there, and then what trigger can we use, and where will that take us? It's an interesting thought. Where does it take us? And I think, I'll speak for myself. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. So maybe that's part of, the personal growth, personal development that we all strive to go through. We're not always going to succeed. But the more we are aware of something like that, I think the better off we are.
I really like the use of those three words: a prompt, a trigger, or awareness. And I think one of the things that we need to be aware of, because they are prompts and triggers, is what do we say in our head when we are facing something that is a fear? Because very often, if we are facing something in our mind and we say to ourselves, "Oh, I could never do that," we turn and avoid. So there's the trigger and the prompt saying in our head, "Oh, I could never do that." That's so do we have the awareness of that is a prompt or a trigger to make a different choice? And I'll give you an example in my own life. There's a gentleman in our church who has reached out to Samaritan's Purse, and he is organizing a trip to Florida to help with hurricane relief there. Those kinds of trips are really scary for me. And I'll say this too, that it sucks to be the courage guy, because when you recognize these opportunities to be courageous, you can't not do them. And I just read an article today online about a guy from Michigan who went down to help with hurricane relief with a friend of his, and he cut his leg earlier in the day. Then he fell in a canal, and then he came out and kept working, went home, and he woke up just sick and ended up dying from a bacteria that he got from falling into the canal. So in my mind, I go, I better not go. Even though I'm signed up, there's this fear of my mind saying, "Oh, don't go, because something might happen." No, so now I have a prompt and a trigger that might tell me to avoid, or the prompt and trigger can say, "You know what? There's been people going down there, and might something happen? Yeah, it might. But likely will it happen? Likely not. And so just go down and help in whatever way you can." And so it's about the awareness of what the prompts and triggers are telling you. "Oh, you could never do that. You're not smart enough. Your dad told you they wish that they'd never had you." So we avoid. And as soon as that trigger a thought in our mind, a negative thought prompts in, we have to change it with a positive thought. "You know what? Yeah, something might happen, but you know what? I'm going to go down and help anyway, because likely it won't happen." So that's when you talk about those words, prompt, trigger, and awareness, that's what came to mind for me.
Yeah. And Dave, I think you shared this a couple months ago. You said, because we were talking about soundtracks, right? So when the prompt happens, the trigger, whatever you want to call it, that says you can't, or, that scares you, that keeps you, in under the covers or whatever it is, and keeps you from moving forward. What if the soundtrack that we play is, instead of the one like, "You can't do that," what if the soundtrack that we have in our mind is, "Who says that you can't?
Yeah.
Who says that you can't?"
Yeah.
And you offered another one very similar. You used the word, the phrase that sometimes, like, something might happen. Well, that might happen to me. And what you told me, and I think Barry, you were in the room when he shared this, is it might happen to me, or it might not. The might not, it might not, right? So the worst case scenario that we might think might happen, well, it might not happen, right? It could be, what are the blessings that could happen? What's the potential play? I remember, Dave, or Barry, you and I, we talked about Guatemala in the last podcast. There was some apprehension going to Guatemala.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody had done that, right? But we're like, you know what? We're going to step forward in this, despite the fear, despite the apprehension. We're going to step forward on it, and we're going to create an expectation that some good is going to happen. But we're not going to be so specific. We're going to be mindful that some good things are going to happen, and we're going to learn to adjust and pivot along the way. Remember that very first day when we were at the hotel, and I think it was Martinelli or Faye, or I can't remember who it was. They came up and they said, "Look, guys, we were planning to do this, but we've got to readjust our schedule. But just know that sometimes this is going to happen," and just have the, I forget what he said exactly, but it kind of set the tone to realize that, you know what, there's going to be some strange things that happen, but just be ready. Be ready, because there's some good things that are going to happen too if we step forward with courage in this.
Well, I think that, go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was just going to say, and here's the thing that ties into this that is so big, and it's, whether the trip that you guys went on or whether it's my trip to Florida, I'm leaving. The day that I'm leaving, if I for some reason between now and then decide not to go, because of fear, not for others, something else might happen. But if I decide not to go because of what might happen, Monday morning I'm going to wake up with tremendous regret, saying, "Why did I not go? I let fear control me." And that's what happens. Do we want to live with regret, or do we want to live with experiences that we went into courageously? And I would rather live with those opportunities and experiences that I went into courageously, rather than spending my life going, "I wish that I would have done that." That's the thing that I think in my mind, and it's one of the things that drives me. I don't want to regret not going, so I am going to go.
Yeah, I love that. I think it was Paul that kind of queued that up. Paul Martinelli, talked about, look, guys, we're gonna go somewhere, we're gonna do something with someone, and we're gonna make a difference. And it's that lesson he's taught us all of, suspending the need to know how. Yeah, and I think that kind of creates that fear. Right? Well, I don't know how to do it, so it's going to be different. It's going to be awkward. It's not going to feel comfortable. And so I'm afraid. And I love how you're framing this up, Dave, because I think you're giving a real world example of, hey, traveling 1,000, 1,500 miles an hour across the country, going from the snow to the sun, and gonna help clean up after a hurricane. I've done that. I've done that with my kids after Katrina. Yeah. So I know what that looks like. And you don't have any idea. I'm not trying to create fear here, but you don't. But I can tell you this, after doing it twice with my boys, or not just me, but for them as well, they'll tell you that was one of the greatest impacts they ever experienced, because one, there was fear. They didn't know what was going on, but they came out of it knowing that they made a difference. Yeah. And so I think that's, that builds kind of those courage muscles, right? Yeah. When you do overcome that fear and you get to the other side. We went through this a bunch of times in Guatemala. Most of us were working with a translator for the first time. I remember talking to Mark Cole, and he kind of had a weird look on his face. And I'm like, "What's up, dude?" And he goes, "Well, they're pulling some of our, our security people away from here because 5 policemen just got assassinated an hour away by the cartel, and they need, all hands on deck out there." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then you walk outside and there's armed, security cops, walking up and down the road, and military fatigues. And it's like, all right, but why did we come here? But the overall experience, I mean, to me, that's life. Those type of experiences are what mold us. That's what gets us beyond where we're at. That's that type of stretching, and it proves to us, to me anyway, that it's worth it. Because very rarely, of all the times I've been courageous and jumped outside my comfort zone, did it feel good? Did I have anxiety? Did I have apprehension? Absolutely. But when it was said and done, I was like, man, that was worth it. Yeah. And I think those are the things we go through in life that I think are really meaningful for us. Right.
And I think too, recognizing again the awareness, the prompt, the trigger, it would be easy for me to rationalize and justify why I shouldn't be there. Yeah. Unlike you, Barry, I have no handiwork, carpentry. I have none of those skills. I know how to pound a nail, but in my mind, what's going to go on down there is all that kind of work. So why am I going? I'm going to just be in the way. And yet I know that there will be plenty of things for me to do, but I could rationalize and justify why I shouldn't be there. I'll just get in the way. And so we have to get past those rationalizations and justifications as well.
Definitely. Well stated.
Yeah. We can come up with all the excuses in the world, but it was Mark Twain who said it. If you want the fruit, you got to go out in the limb and get it. That's the only way you're going to get the fruit. And sometimes you may not know how. Sometimes it may be a situation where I've never gotten fruit like that before. Well, that's okay. We talked about Guatemala. I don't really speak Spanish very well. Barry doesn't speak any Spanish, but we went, right? Maxwell, despite that, what happened, he still went and did he met all of his appointments. I know that. He wasn't going to let that stop him. Was there fear? Absolutely. Was there apprehension? For sure, 100%. Was there potential doubt and, concern? Of course. I would say those are healthy, right? If you're going to climb a mountain at Yosemite, right? Name a rock there. There's a bunch of them. El Capitan. If you're going to climb that, if you're not climbing that with a little bit of fear and apprehension, you're probably not going to survive it. But the fact that you're climbing it and that fear and apprehension is there is going to increase your awareness and your alertness. You're going to be a little bit more alert. But if you add courage to it, boy, courage will lift you. So trying to be fearless might kill you, but courage, man, that's going to lift you.
Yeah.
So step forward with that. And here's the other thing. Dave, you're going to go out to Florida. You're going to have a whole support team behind you. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you're going down solo.
Right.
You've got others with you.
Yep.
Others back home may be praying for you. And I think that's really important. That's another element of the soundtrack, right? What are the soundtracks that you have playing in your mind, and start to leverage that and use that? So,
yeah. And Paul, too, what's really critical in this is recognizing that when we do things courageously, other people are watching.
Oh, yeah.
And so what kind of, do we send a message of courage to people, or do we send a message of fear to people? And I think about my 4 grandkids that live about a mile from me. And what kind of message do I want to send to them? Do I want to send one to them of, oh, no, I'm not going to go because I'm afraid this might happen? Or do I want to send a message of, yeah, this might be a little scary, but I'm going anyway? And so recognize that people are watching, and we are setting an example for others.
That's so good.
I forget who it was. I think maybe Yogi Berra. So one of you guys might remember, but something to the effect of 5% of the things that I've worried about actually happened.
Yeah.
We worry about so much, but what are we doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing? It's I don't know. I guess it's just the way we live. We have that fear that things aren't going to work out just right, but that's where we learn. There's a book out there. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. There's some fear in some of those stories, right?
Well, here's a story for you guys. In 2002, a year after 9/11, here on the East Coast, there was something called the sniper shooting, and it wasn't just one and done kind of thing. All right, John Muhammad and I forget who it was. The two guys. One was a son-in-law or somebody, I don't know. And these 2 people, and nobody knew who they were. Everybody thought it was a white box truck and somebody with a gun shooting people at gas stations and coming out of hobby stores and other places. It was happening in my backyard right here. And let me tell you, the fear it ran that thing up, as high as it could be. So we still needed to get around. We needed to get to our job, but we were ducking under cover. We were running into the buildings. When we were getting gas, we would jump out, go to the pump, start it up, and jump in our car while it was still filling up. All right. And I remember one time, not far from here, at a gas station, there was a shooting. They had, Geraldo Rivera, right? He was here and all that. There was a bunch. The whole news world was here. And so a couple of days later, I needed gas. Guess where I went? I went to the place where that shooting was. Not because I wanted to see that crime scene. I didn't. But I knew it was probably the safest place to get gas in the whole area. And I remember when they finally caught the guy. And here's what's really crazy, guys. When they caught the guy, they showed a picture on the news. And I looked at him and I looked over at my wife and goes, oh my gosh, I saw that guy. And my wife says, what? Come again? I said, the other night when I was at Food Line, it was a grocery store. I was getting ice cream and there was a guy looking at the ice cream and he was just kind of staring and looking at it. And I just said to him, they all look good, don't they? And he kind of smiled and That was it. But I looked at his face and I thought, man, I've never seen this dude before. And now I'm looking on the news and I see a picture that looks just like that guy that was in that grocery store. And I realized, how close was I in that moment? And it makes you kind of think, but then it makes you realize, you know what? We've got to live our life.
Yep.
We got to step forward. We can't live with that kind of fear. We're going to feel the fear. It's okay to feel the fear. But how can you climb El Capitan with the fear? Have courage, step forward, make a difference, be there for others. It's not just about you, it's about others. And, you know, those are just some thoughts there. And I'm going to pull more of that together, but you kind of triggered that thought for me as I remember back to 2002.
Well, don't forget. Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, I two thoughts. One coming from Barry, and one coming from you there, Paul. You gave the Yogi Berra quote of 5% of the things that we think might happen, and recognize that when something does happen, because things are going to happen to us in life, it gives us another opportunity to be courageous and resilient. Yep. So recognize that. And then, Paul, the thought that crossed my mind as you talked about that, I would say that with what you experienced in Virginia with the shootings back in 2002, there's a rational level of fear with that. I mean, that's rational fear. I'll say what's an even bigger fear and an even bigger something that holds us back from being resilient is irrational fear. And that's the fear of what might happen, and the fear of, oh, I might let somebody down, or I'm not smart enough, or I don't have letters behind my name, or I don't. I think that's even more important. My daughter had cancer a couple of years ago. There was a rational fear for her and for us as her family that she might not be with us for very long. Thankfully, she survived and is doing very, very well. But there's a difference between rational fear, things that truly are worthy of being afraid of, and irrational fear, things that keep us from becoming who we should be or can be or who we're called to be.
Great statement, Dave. And you kind of went where I was going to go to bring resilient back into the conversation. We kind of gone down this courageous trail.
Yeah.
But the resilient piece is part of it, right? Because we can be courageous, and something's going to go wrong. There is going to be a swing at our armor, and a slowdown, a bump in the road. But that resiliency is what is going to keep you going. So it's kind of a combination of the two. And go back to one of your early statements where you can have, you can't have courage without fear. You can have fear without courage, but you can't have courage without fear. And I don't know if you can really have success without resiliency, because you've got to be able to overcome the obstacles. It's one thing to be courageous and say, I'm going to take that next step. Well, sometimes that next step isn't so easy. That resiliency is going to keep pushing you forward. So there's a good combination. Good two words to put together. What do you think, Paul?
I love this. I think we can keep going on, but we do need to land the plane. And so what I want to do is have you guys share a tip and challenge that maybe we can offer our listeners and our viewers on this whole idea of resilience. And I think of resilience, just from a historical standpoint. You see the comebacks that happen, whether it's a recession that takes place, whether it's my dad was born in 1929, and so that element of the Great Depression had a huge impact on him, and then of course, Pearl Harbor, and I. Back in that time, right after actually probably during the Great Depression and after Walt Disney, he declared bankruptcy. And yet it was after the bankruptcy, he came back and created, Walt Disney World, or, the whole Walt Disney empire, right in the midst of all of that, right? So you look back and you can see through history that despite all those things, and I look at my dad and I think of resilience when I think of my dad, right? Navy guy and all that. I think of resilience when I meet the person who has been fighting cancer. I think of resilience when there's somebody who has lost their job, but you know what? They haven't given up. yeah, it hurts, but they haven't given up. They're finding that next step forward. And I think the opportunity is for all of us is to speak life into other people. That we need it for ourselves, yes, but we get an opportunity to encourage somebody else who's been struggling. It's not just giving them a handout, it's giving them hope. And how can we give them hope? Let's find that way to do that. And so with that, I'm going to let you guys share a tip and challenge for folks to maybe speak life into themselves, but speak life into other people. How do we be resilient? What are some thoughts that you guys have with that? So Dave, you're our guest. I'd love for you to start us off with this one.
All right. Something we didn't talk about, but oftentimes we think that the fears that we have only impact us. But the reality is our fears have an impact on other people. And so I want to challenge and encourage the listeners and the viewers to ask themselves this question: who pays the price, or who is paying the price for your fear? And in that, recognizing the importance of stepping into your fears courageously, because somebody will pay a price if you don't, and others are watching you, and maybe it's your kids or your grandkids or your employees or your neighbors or whoever. But ask yourself that question: who pays the price for your fear?
Wow, that is a powerful thought. Barry, yeah, your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So I think my tip would be: look, fear is really nothing more than getting outside of your comfort zone. To me, I mean, that kind of sums it up. Anytime we look or consider or are forced to get outside of our comfort zone, it is uneasy. There is fear in there. So don't fool yourself into, thinking that, oh, it's not fear. It's just anxiety and apprehension. No, it's fear. Come on. It's fear. And that's okay. I think a wise guy once said that fear is the first step to wisdom, something like that. So maybe there's something there, but I'll leave you with this challenge. And I haven't done this in any venue, I think, in about 6 months, and I should do it more often. But here's my challenge to you. Today, tomorrow, sometime soon, do something you've never done. Do something you've never done before. Do something do something for the first time.
Yeah.
Do something for the first time. Doesn't have to be huge. Do something for the first time. I encourage us. I do a weekly training with the, new members of Maxwell Leadership Community on Saturday mornings. And I encourage them, a lot of these people are on a similar path that I was on, a scary path, right? Of transitioning out of something that you've been doing for 30 years, you've been good at, right? And going into something completely different. And I say, look, if your next step in overcoming the fear, hit *61, get in the queue, just introduce yourself, the path of least resistance, make it easy, make it something that you can be consistently moving forward with. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be climbing El Capitan.
Yeah.
Just something, do something. I use this phrase, you guys, some of you have heard this, but you got to do something you've never done before in order to become someone you've never been before. That could be scary. That could take some fear to overcome. That's the only way you're going to get there.
Guys, you are dropping some gold today. This is awesome. I love both those takes, and I just want to sprinkle some sprinkles on top of that. Put some fudge on some of this. This is so good, right? I mean, Dave, you're talking about, who pays for the price for your fear, and what comes up for me and maybe all our listeners and viewers is, wait a minute, if I just let the fear rule, the fear is real. The fear is real. But if I just let it stop me from doing what I need to do, then that fear is going to be more real for somebody else, because they're going to fear it too. But if I step forward on it, if I go out on that limb and I go get that fruit, maybe that's going to encourage somebody else. And that might be fruit, like what Barry's sharing. When's the last time he did something for the first time? And when we're young, we're always doing something for the first time. We're doing it all the time, and we're learning, we're growing. That's how you learn and grow. Do something new. So I wrote, man, there's such power in this. I wrote as you guys are sharing, I'm writing down thoughts. And here's one, guys: there's always a way. there's always a way. William Shatner, as Captain Kirk said, I don't believe in no-win scenarios. And that's how kind of my mindset. There's got to be a way through this. There's got to be a way to this. We talked about some of those powerful stories that took place. They all took a different, perhaps, path than what they originally thought. They didn't know how. Suspend the belief to know how. I love that thought. So much gold in this one. What can I learn from this experience? That's what I'm going to share with you as sort of this. Again, this is the chocolate. This is the sprinkles on top of what these guys have just shared. Ask yourself that question. What can I learn from this experience?
Oh.
And if you just ask that question, boy, there's something new every day. There's always you evaluate that experience, it's going to make you stronger, and it's going to encourage other people.
You know, I love the way you frame that up, Paul. It's beautiful because I think most people forget that. You know, they forget that you can learn from anything. You know, those that don't learn from what we're afraid of, what we fail in, that's where the failure and the fear is. You know, if you learn from it, then it's a lesson learned. It's something you can utilize moving forward. And I love the way you frame it, man. It's like, what can you learn? There's good in everything.
Yeah.
There's absolutely, Paul Martinelli, find the good. Find the good. Love that phrase.
Find the good.
Always something to learn. Always a takeaway. Maybe it's that you found out you don't ever want to do that again, right?
But
it's still a learn, right? It's a result, and that will help you take the next step.
Yeah. Powerful. Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been great.
Brother.
Appreciate it.
It has been an honor, and I just appreciate you guys so much and learn from both of you. And so I'm grateful to be a part of this with you.
And I'm grateful that we're doing this on Zoom so that nobody else can see how vertically challenged I am around you guys.
We all look the same now, don't
That's
we?
right.
That's all right. And we all got our blue shirts on. We're blue shirt guy. Ryan Reynolds, that's a call out to you. We need to have you on our podcast.
Ooh, now that would be fun.
Let's do that. I got a friend who's kind of a lookalike Ryan Reynolds. Maybe
really?
Get him on.
Well,
but guys, this is awesome.
Tell everybody it's him.
Yeah, I could. Guys, thank you for watching, listening to the Breaking Average podcast, and check us out on the breakingaverage.com website. Dave, how do they follow you, man? How do they connect with you? Because here's the great thing. I want to make sure we promote some of the things that you're doing. You are you're lifting lives up. You are pouring courage into other people. You are an encourager. And I love the fact that you do that. You speak nationally, internationally probably too. I don't know. But how do they follow you? How do they reach out to you?
Yeah, you can check out my website at cultivatecourage.com. I have a book by that same title, Cultivate Courage, which you can find on Amazon. And then I also have an online course, which you can find at cultivate-courage.teachable.com, where it will take you through, I believe there's 10 lessons on how to become more courageous and how to recognize fear in your life. So I just want to encourage people to check all of those out. So thank you so much for that, Paul.
Yeah, very good. And we'll put all those links in the show notes and our YouTube link and all that. So look for that below. And man, this has been great. Thanks guys for joining us. And Dave, stay warm out there. It's going to be a cold one.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Safe travels, brother.
Yeah, safe travels. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Breaking Average podcast. If you loved what you heard, please take a moment to subscribe. This show was produced by R Squared Multimedia. All opinions and comments expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or views of any of the advertisers, producers, or platforms. As you continue your day, what is one action that you can apply from this podcast to your life? Tune in for our next episode as we continue to challenge everyone to break average.